Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Grandinetti, and I'm Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer with Reduxio Systems. I want to thank you for joining us. Clearly an extraordinarily important and timely topic that seems to become more visible and more relevant by the day. So the nature of today's one-hour webinar is focused on preventing malware, specifically in state, municipal, local government institutions. And I'm going to be joined by a couple of experts, but let me just spend a minute or two providing a little bit of context. Yes, I am an officer at Reduxio, but I'm really speaking to you primarily as an educator, as someone who has spent a significant part of my career also teaching at MIT Sloan School and now as a professor of innovation and entrepreneurship at the Holt International Business School. So in very many ways, we intend this to be not a sales pitch, but instead something far different than that, an opportunity to educate you on what is happening with malware and ransomware in the world of state, local, and municipal government. So I'll spend just a few minutes providing a very brief overview on Reduxio and who we are. The core of our webinar will be a fireside chat that I will host with John Bambanek, and I will give him a much more proper introduction in a moment, but he is a renowned global cybersecurity expert. And like me, John is also an academic. He is a faculty member at the University of Illinois, and in many ways he'll be sharing his expertise both as a faculty member where he teaches in their cybersecurity program, and also based on his long-standing two-decade role as a cybersecurity advisor and incident handler. We'll take about 35 minutes in total during that part of the webinar, and then we'll wrap up with Eli Lopez. Eli is actually broadcasting live from Tel Aviv, Israel, and he's a long-standing member of the IT industry from Israel, and he now manages customer support at Reduxio. We'll also leave at least 10 minutes for questions, and as a way of trying to continue to provide educational content, you'll see we've got a number of attachments and links, including a Twitter news feed on malware trends. So I want to just spend a few minutes on Reduxio, and I don't want to tell you about Reduxio myself. I want to let you hear about it through the voices of a lot of top-tier IT industry analysts. I'm assuming that many of you on the phone are full-time IT professionals, and you're quite aware of some of these analyst firms, but Forrester Research describing Reduxio in a recent report as one of 3 vendors globally disrupting the integrated secondary storage and data protection market. And despite the fact that we're a relatively young and innovative company, they position us as a stable innovator. Gartner, the gold standard in industry analysis, includes us in 2 of their hype cycles, one for storage, one for business continuity and IT resilience, and positions us as someone providing continuous data protection. Frost & Sullivan, the long-standing London, UK, and Silicon Valley-based analyst firm, recently awarded us the North American Data Storage and Management Innovation Award. More recently, forward the slide here, International Data Corporation has spoken at length about Reduxio eliminating the need for purpose-built backup appliances, which reduces cost and complexity for many organizations. And just this morning, we put out a press release from the 451 Research Group saying that we've developed an unusual primary storage system that uses content data management to address the complexity and the problems that are involved in data center backup and recovery, and refers to Reduxio as a pioneer in this industry. Okay. Recently, we are also awarded the first ever Fortress Cybersecurity Award. There's a press release on our website and additional descriptions about what it took to be named the winner of that award that I would point you to. Okay. But in addition to winning a lot of other awards by credible organizations like Network World and Storage Magazine, there's no question that the single most important part of our validation comes from our customers. We've got about 250 customers worldwide. A significant number of those customers come from state and local government. In the town of Massachusetts, we've got no less than 10 local governments, including the town of Barnstable, the Brockton school system, the Barnstable Police Department is an organization that we have worked with for the past 18 months, and there's a lot of significant news around a ransom attack that we allowed the Barnstable PD with 200-plus sworn officers to very rapidly and elegantly recover from in less than 20 minutes, which is a rare, happy ending for a ransom attack. In California, we have the town of Thousand Oaks, and we have many other state and local government agencies, school systems, police departments as part of our portfolio of customers. Okay. The last thing I'll say about Reduxio is that of all of the storage vendors that are publicly known, Reduxio has the single highest rating of any global storage vendor with a almost perfect 9.7 customer rating. Some of our larger competitors have ratings as low as 5, so it gives you some indication of the fact that we've been able to deliver value to a large number of customers who are only too happy to share it in a public forum. So all that being said, I now am really pleased to have the opportunity to be joined by John Van Bannock. John is someone who brings an extraordinary amount of both credibility and gravitas to this discussion. He has spent over 20 years of his career as a cybersecurity advisor and consultant. He's also a teacher at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he teaches a number of cybersecurity lab courses and other hands-on courses. He is a principal with the organization known as ThreatStop, and he's been an incident handler at the Internet Storm Center for many years. He's also worked very closely with agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Interpol and others, to go after some of the most notorious cyber hackers that have been known. So, John, welcome back. It's great to have a chance to spend more time with you, and really appreciate you joining us today.
No, I'm always glad to do it and join in and talking about one of my research interests in ransomware. So almost since the beginning of ransomware emerging, or at least the modern ransomware, I would say, it's been a subject of my own research and professional experience, right? And actually what got me into it was a local government here near me who got ransomware, got their files encrypted and asked if I could recover it, and that kind of started the whole chain of events of me being involved, and ended up with a major criminal indictment. So certainly it's something that's been around for about 5 years now, give or take, in its more modern form. And you see a lot of statistics here out there that indicate how widespread it is. Recently, the IC3, which is part of the FBI, released their report on cybercrime data yesterday, I believe, perhaps the day before, that has very similar numbers to this, right? But 15% of businesses, in the top 10 industry sectors have been attacked, right? You could see that. Ransomware is a problem in education and telecom. Everybody has had it one way or another. But I think one fascinating anecdote for me personally, right? I've been doing this for 20 years. So every now and then people say, hey, what do I need to protect my security? They ask me the general question. Ransomware is the only threat I ever get specifically asked about. How do I stop that from small to medium business? We've all got family members who are not tech savvy who ask this question.
Right.
This is the first and only threat I've ever heard specifically asked about at the level of detail of just random people. So we all kind of know what it is.
Yeah, and I know that there's a statistic I saw that said that there have been 15 million searches on the word ransomware, in the last year. And clearly it's been extremely newsworthy with the WannaCry attack that took down the National Health Institute in the UK and Maersk and FedEx and Honda. So there's no question. It certainly seems to make for good news, right? But let me ask you a very pointed question right off the start, right? As someone who's been in this space for 20 years, is cybersecurity or computer security an oxymoron? Is it something that is even possible to achieve?
To an extent, right? I mean, ultimately it's about mitigating risk in a large variety of things, right? People still get hit by cars crossing the street. You can never cross the street again. That's an option that eliminates that threat. Or air travel. I got off a plane this morning. Life is risky, but there are things we can do to mitigate and make ourselves safe, right? With WannaCry. If you applied the Windows patching that US CERT kind of subtly alluded to, or others, you would have been relatively protected. Now, there's some barriers to that. It's simple to say, but there certainly are things we can do to either, one, prevent security incidents, in the first place, or to make the incidents themselves much less impactful.
Yeah. Okay, and we're definitely going to start to get into that in a moment or two. So I know that the numbers are staggering depending on what study that one looks at, right? Numbers I've looked at recently said we've gone from roughly $300 million in ransom or extortion fees paid just 2 years ago to $1 billion last year, to a prediction that we'll see up to $5 billion paid before the end of this year. I think the only real important point to take away is there's real money being spent by organizations of all sizes. The SamSam coalition of cyber hackers look like they've landed on a $51,000, per cyber hack fee, and it looks like they're making millions of dollars a year. So we'll talk more about, why someone would or would not pay as we go forward. But as I skip to this slide specifically, which of course is very much relevant for our audience today, I've seen some fascinating statistics that tell me that governmental institutions are the number 2 industry targeted, and at the same time they're ranked next to last in terms of their ability to prevent or recover from attacks. So there seems to be a tremendous dichotomy between them being highly targeted because they need to operate on a continuous basis, and obviously being very under-resourced, having a lot of difficulty in preventing these attacks. And of course, between Atlanta, which was the most sustained and consequential attack we've seen, the Pittsburgh 911 system, Dallas being hacked, where tornado alarms were set to go off in the middle of the night, and even here in Massachusetts, the Tewksbury Police Department, the Barnstable Police Department, the town of Leominster, all have been subject to these attacks. So can you comment on this specific sector where our audience is from today? What context can you provide them in terms of where we may be and what they can do?
Yeah, I think this comes down to why governments are a target, or to a variety of factors that all kind of intersect when you're dealing with government, particularly kind of local, regional government. Is security spending generally. If you take a major financial institution, they're spending upwards of 10% of their budget on security, and they can afford to do that. Most enterprises, it's around 4%. Most governments, it's around 2%. Because for a wide variety of reasons that, leave to the imagination of why that is. Certainly the pay differential that exists between government service and the private sector. And we all have seen various iterations of how many unfilled cybersecurity jobs there are. The last is actually what I think is most interesting, because it came up this morning as a consequence of Iran and our decisions there, is that when you have these geopolitical conflicts, foreign adversaries target governments because they don't really distinguish between, the town of Manchester and the United States. They say, we got a police department, we got the Americans. So even though, they're not the federal government with all the national secrets in there, there's certainly some risk there that you get from geopolitical attacks, which goes back to WannaCry and the National Health Service. That was attributed to North Korea back when there was more vivacious conflict going on between various Western countries and North Korea. So I think all of those build into kind of a perfect storm of harm for government, on top of the fact that you really can't hide it when your police department gets ransomware, right? When local governments or regional governments stop working because of ransomware in Atlanta, right?
Yes.
There's no way to kind of sweep that under the rug, whereas many other organizations have ways to be discreet and continue business operations. I mean, if a police department can't do booking, right, that creates all sorts of things that are very immediately apparent.
Yeah, there's no question. We've obviously been engaged in discussions with prospective customers and eventually customers who more or less swore us to secrecy about the fact that they had been attacked before, they had a painful recovery to the extent that they had a recovery, and that, we were brought in after the horse left the barn, right? And of course, it remains our secret. But I think, one of the things that I've read, and of course, Atlanta's town government and mayor has been subjected to withering attacks on the way that they've handled this and the way that they've messaged this. But you're right. You can't hide it, right? You can't hide it when people can't pay for their services, or you can't hide it when you're unable to get permits for housing, or, be able to call 911 and have an emergency vehicle show up at your house while one of your loved ones needs, acute medical attention. One of the things that I've read indicates that despite the fact that Atlanta had warning signals 9 months before the attack, they did, if not nothing, very little to prevent it, right? And as I read further as we got ready for our talk, less than half of all state and local government agencies actually have a cybersecurity policy at all, which to me seems just careless, if not reckless. Why, if it's been so visible, and from what I've read, about 185 to 200 state and local government agencies have been targeted in the last 2 years, some of them almost on an hourly basis, it seems like cognitive dissonance that, we wouldn't see almost 100% compliance with the understanding of the importance of a policy to at least recover from a cyber attack if it does happen.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some economies of scale that could happen that need to be established. MISAC and MSISAC are ways to do that, of how to at least do intelligence sharing, right? Because not every local government is going to be able to hire an intelligence analyst just to protect their network, right? When you're talking about local government, there's wide varieties of sizes, and everybody in a sense stands alone, which is somewhat of an unideal situation, right? The difficulty in protecting our election system is a great example. There's thousands of independent election authorities, right, who all could hire 2-3 people to help secure the election process in their county or city, depending on how it comes down. But that's just the payroll of that, would be immense. It would swamp that whole $390 million that Congress just appropriated for election security. We certainly need to do better about, either low-cost prevention or low-cost recovery options, because now we really do understand the value of the loss, right? And we see it with Atlanta. That cost over $2 million in what they just spent in recovery, and that's not even that's just true cost. That's not lost time or payroll or inefficiencies or all the intangible impacts of the breach. It was just somebody had to start cutting emergency appropriations worth over $2 million.
Yep. So, but what's interesting, there seems to be a lot of low-hanging fruit, right? In many cases, there are, obviously under-resourced IT or security departments that are not replacing obsolete software, that are not performing patches on a timely basis. So, it obviously starts with some of the basics. And what can you say about that? How can people even begin to just address the fundamentals as a way to, start to reduce their risk without even getting into some of the more sophisticated recommendations I'll ask you to make in a moment or two?
Sure. Well, I think that the irony is ransomware, despite it being destructive, is also one of the world's best security awareness regimes ever devised. Any city manager can now point, look what happened to Atlanta. This is why I need to put in automatic updates into Windows, right? I mean, that's built into Windows. You can set it in Active Directory so that, I know I can't stage patches. I don't have software to manage it. But you know what? I can put Microsoft that says every Wednesday morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, these machines are getting rebooted, and then you handle your couple of servers individually if you have to, or even automate that. And I know every small organization I've worked in has groused about that. It's like, oh, I might leave a Word document open. It's like, well, we're patching because we've got to do it.
Right.
And now we know why we have to do it. Patching is important, right? Security awareness is another one. Is that if I worked in a local government unit of government, just says, this is what happened at Atlanta. This is how they got through, right? And there are various reports that come through MSISAC and MISAC to say, hey, here are the threats. You can just say, hey, listen, right, non-technical person, here's what you can do to not make sure we're next, because ultimately every user can be an avenue by which any organization can be compromised. Somebody's got to die per se, right? But we don't all have to, right? Let's learn from our mistakes.
Yeah. So can you kind of list for our listeners what the key mistakes are that are so easily avoidable that they could literally have an impact on their organization's security, beginning tomorrow morning, having listened to this webinar and your recommendations?
I think auto-updating patches where you can is certainly, very important. For things that you can't manage, outsourcing to Office 365 or Google services or whatever. So you have to manage less infrastructure. I know there's a lot of talk about adoption in the cloud and moving towards these platform as a service, so that they're managing most of the patching and security for you and the hardening for you. But there's a lot of other steps, right? We talked about security awareness. Both MISAC and MSISAC produce intelligence that can be put into firewalls, your DNS server, so that if you do have a user that accidentally clicks something, bad domain doesn't resolve, or the firewall doesn't let me go to that bad IP address.
Right.
Many local governments could just start blocking every IP address in Eastern Europe, because why would a local town ever need to communicate with Russian IP addresses?
Right.
You could you could do coarse things like that, right? Which people kind of turn their nose down. Oh, that's not targeted, but at a certain point, why deal with the risk?
Exactly. Now, as you've mentioned, MISAC will provide information. I'm assuming that there's a lot of other free resources that are available, including the Internet Storm Center. Mm-hmm. What are some of the either very low cost or free resources that are available, to what I would imagine be on this call the majority of smaller municipal government agencies that don't have large IT and security budgets? What would be some free resources that they could avail themselves of to further help themselves?
Well, you do mention one, right? The SANS Internet Storm Center, which is basically the resource that SANS does, mostly to educate people on what threats are out there, hopefully with some idea of, how you can protect yourself. So many of the handlers say, I saw this today. This is how I figured out what was going on. And if you do this, you're protected, right? And it's non-commercial, right? When nobody's selling product there. It's just, here's information that you can use out there. And it's, like I said, geared to people who are in the trenches defending networks every day, right? Yep. Certainly, there's lots of guides out there to harden systems. The Center for Internet Security has various hardening guides to say, I've got Active Directory. Here's how I need to harden it and secure it. OWASP for every local government probably has some sort of web applications, or at least a website to interact with. They have free development guidance, libraries you can use to do secure development, and tools to assess your own security with the Z-Attack proxy. And certainly you can use OpenVAS and some of the other open source tools to just say, hey, how secure am I really? For Windows, there's ESET, or the Advanced Security Mitigation Toolkit, where you can install that on machines to provide some additional security as well.
That's great. So, John, what I'm going to propose, perhaps you and I jointly author a blog post that will capture some of these great recommendations and suggestions that we will post to the Reduxio Beyond the Blocks blog on our website, because I think there's a lot of things here that are going to be very valuable to our audience today.
Absolutely.
Now, in terms of, as you mentioned, right, there's a huge gap between the number of security positions that are open and need to be filled and the talent required to fill them. And of course, many towns don't have the luxury of large IT departments, and oftentimes you've got IT people that focus on everything from network to compute to storage to security. How would you recommend the people in their current roles, either take advantage of students or recent graduates in these cyber programs? How do they leverage some of the younger people that are just coming out that may not be, able to go off and get a job at a large organization and are still learning their craft? Are there ways for the people in our audience today to be able to leverage a lot of the new graduates, or is it just a very difficult thing to find people in general?
No, I don't think it's difficult to leverage graduates or especially interns. Almost everybody's around at least a community college, if not a university. Many are adopting various flavors of cybersecurity programs, and certainly just technology generally. One of the things that I do on my campus, right, the University of Illinois is a big system. It is well capitalized, but doesn't have the investment in cybersecurity that you would think it does. So I take my students and say, okay, you get a 3-hour internship class, which is basically a work study, and the campus IT security gets a semester out of them. I mean, it's part-time work, but to develop some of those projects that are lingering to move the ball forward that the guys in the trenches who are fighting fires every day can't. And certainly setting up those kind of partnerships, I think, has real value. The students get experience and things they need for their resume, and various units of local government or universities can get the help they need of just doing the relative simple stuff that doesn't take a highly compensated people. It's just somebody who's got time to just handle it.
That's great. And I guess just last point on education, right? There's obviously so many online courses available for free today through a number of platforms. Are there any that you are very familiar with that you might recommend to those that might not be able to get away for a 5-day or full-week cybersecurity course at University of Illinois or Rutgers or all of these other state universities that are now offering these programs?
There's a variety of platforms that have a lot of things going from free to relative low costs. Coursera has access to a lot of university content. You can go on to Pluralsight or Skillshare, which usually has some pretty low-cost classes. There's OpenSecurityTraining.info, which has a wide variety of content. It may just be slides and supporting materials. Some have videos attached to it. So there's starting to be actually a lot of opportunities. And even if you can't get away to go to a conference, taking a look at events called B-Sides, they're in almost every major city in the world. They're low-cost events, less than $100, where fellow professionals are just talking about the neat stuff they're doing. And some of it is, pen testing and offense, and a lot of it is defense. And certainly, right, there's a lot of professionals, where you live facing the same challenges, and hearing how other people solve some of those problems, right? Create some of that efficiency. Not everybody has to solve every problem. Right.
So a lot of knowledge transfer. That's great. Mm-hmm. John, I'm gonna shift gears a little bit and ask you: are there specific vendors out there that are targeting this sector specifically, that understand the unique requirements of the sector, and you've come across that could be beneficial for our audience?
Sure. I think part of the problem in cybersecurity generally is that we have a lot of vendors, and they're all targeting the major enterprise sales. So I can point to any number of people who says, "Oh yeah, we'll do something for you. Just cut us a $250,000 PO."
Right.
It's not going to happen, right? And we do have some very difficult problems, getting solutions into the SMB and small government types of ecosystems. But certainly there's lots of antivirus and endpoint plays they all have kind of smaller opportunities out there. The firm I work with, ThreatStop, is focusing on firewalls and DNS, which has a very scaled approach where we're not rolling in with huge POs. Our average sale is 5 figures, right? So, there are a few companies out there that will give affordable options to smaller organizations that can create tailored protection, saying, okay, you're a government or an election authority. Okay, we're going to give you access to protections that would relate to the threats election authorities face, and things of that sort. So, there are a handful out there. The unfortunate reality is almost everybody's, all the VC-backed cybersecurity firms are looking for the 6-7 figure major enterprise deal, and finding what's left in those other firms is probably a lot of work for those actually trying to find something cost-effective to protect their organization.
That's great. And again, I know that we've got around 20 or so organizations that have become customers of ours, whether they be state, local, municipal, whether they be school districts, whether they be police departments. But you and I have known each other. You've known Reduxio for about 18 months. I know that you were a student of, all the technologies required. Would you just comment on, where you think Reduxio would best fit into the infrastructure of some of the organizations who are listening in today?
Well, I think, like I said, the interesting and exciting thing for me is that ransomware, particularly, is really just a math problem, right? It's organized crime. As long as the value of the data they're taking from you is more than the ransom, right? It makes, quote, business sense to pay the ransom. But there's multiple variables to that, right? There's the cost of recovery too. There are organizations who've had all the backup tapes, right? Your sound backup strategy using Tower of Hanoi and all the things that we've talked about, and did the math. It's like the cost of actually going to our tapes and recovering this is still more than the ransom. Right. The ability of just reducing the impact of a breach to something like, okay, we know something happened. It's obviously disruptive, right? Even if it lasts a minute, right? People are like, we've got to go deal with this problem. But if you get it to the point where you can deal with it on the scale of minutes instead of on the scale of days, organizations like the City of Atlanta never would have been in the press. Yep,
absolutely. Absolutely. So last question before I forward. So, some of the things that I've read indicate that, and it really ties back to your point, there's been this, the looking for the lemonade in the lemon. Yes, ransomware has been extremely destructive, but it is, as you said, sort of the greatest public relations campaign ever for the importance of security. There are arguments to be made that not only do towns need to provide both fire safety and police safety, but now they need to elevate cybersecurity to the same level. Very, very ambitious. How long will it take to see that become mainstream in town and state governments around the country?
Well, I think there's a lot of attention to it. I think by and large, everybody's buying into it. And every now and then, right, there's a major incident that says, this is what this can cost if we don't do this. Because, anything in security is talking about ROI. If I'm taking money, security in almost every organization is a cost. It's never going to generate more revenue, which always makes it a hard sale. And even, not that those calculations are identically like that in government, but it's the same thing. It's to say, hey, it's always easier to justify the need of spending money to prevent something after it's already happened to somebody else. So we all see it. We've all seen the impact. The City of Atlanta is another painful reminder, that there is a need to address this. And the good news is there are cost-effective ways of doing it.
All right. Well, John, listen, it's always a pleasure. I thank you very much for sharing your experience and your insights. I'll ask you if you could just stick around for the Q&A, but at this point I want to now transition and introduce my colleague, Eli Lopez, who is joining us from Tel Aviv, Israel. And of course, I think most of the people on the phone know that Israel has in many ways been sort of the world leader in security and cybersecurity. Eli has spent his entire career working in the IT industry, specifically the storage industry, in Israel, both as a user as well as on the vendor side. And he's worked with a number of major storage companies, including NetApp and EMC. Eli has been with Reduxio almost since the very first days of its incorporation. And he's a real expert both on the way that our customers use our technology as well as on our architecture. So, Eli, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I thank you for joining us on very late in the day in Israel. And I'm going to mute myself, Eli, and turn over the floor to you, okay?
Okay, my pleasure. Good afternoon to everybody. So I was recently at a cybersecurity panel. There were like 25 to 30 vendors, each with their own flavor of cybersecurity tools that they're developing and selling. And they were all arguing and talking about their various aspects of their tools and products. But one thing they did agree about is that the hackers will have the upper hand. The hackers will get through. It's not a question of if anymore, it's a question of when. And that was unanimous agreement that the world has changed and they will get in and they will damage your data. So of course, we're always told to back up and protect our data and save copies. But one interesting observation that I've noticed in the storage industry, and as Mike said, I've been in this industry for quite a while. There are a lot of storage vendors out there, and all of them are fast and reliable. It's not a question anymore. Any storage product you buy, and excuse me, our salespeople, but will be fast and reliable. But one interesting observation is that although there's been incredible growth in the amount of data we store, and it's growing all the time, although the importance of data is also increasing significantly, and as the topic of our conversation today, the risks to data are growing exponentially all of the time. There have been billions of dollars invested into the storage industry by major companies, by startups, and still all of these storage vendors, and I mean all of them, protect data using Snapshots, which is a technology that has been around for 25 years, and which means that if you need to revert to a snapshot, you're going to lose many hours of your work. So all of these billions of dollars being put into this industry, all of these efforts, and none of these vendors have made any significant change in the way data is protected, which is quite amazing to me. And of course, the impact of using a snapshot or reverting to a snapshot is that if you keep, let's say, 4 snapshots a day, every 6 hours, if something were to happen a little before 8 p.m., you need to go back to a snapshot that you took at 2 p.m., you're going to lose 6 hours. Multiply that by the number of people working with that data, and you have a giant impact. Many times, for many particular reasons, that snapshot is not usable, and you need to go back to a previous snapshot. And again, you're going to lose 12 hours. And it always surprises me. I walk into customers, I do many customer visits, and I ask them, do they use snapshots? They say yes. And I say, how many snapshots do you use? It always surprises me how few snapshots customers actually keep. So it usually ranges between 2, 3, maybe 4 snapshots a day. So this is a technology that has been around for 25 years, and yet all of the storage vendors use this technology to protect your data. The reason snapshots are less optimal in 2018 is that because of virtualization, people are easily spinning up more and more servers all of the time. Because of the advancements in fast technology for storing data and fast servers and fast networks, all this means is that there are hundreds of thousands of IOs being recorded on your storage every second. And that is why any amount of time that you lose, and when it gets to the hours, you're going to be losing vast amounts of data that was written. This is why this is such a giant impact today. And again, it always amazes me that this is what the world has to offer for customers. So this actually pushed customers to try and strive to get to what IDC calls it the new race to zero. Customers are striving to get to RPO 0 and RTO 0, meaning that they want to, anytime they need to revert to a previous copy or to a backup, they want to lose as little as data as possible, which is the RPO 0, and they want it, the actual action of going back to that particular saved copy to take as little time as possible. Now, until now, getting to the actual RPO, RTO 0 was only in very expensive and complex solutions. But today we see, because of all the risks to data, we see even smaller customers that are trying to get close to achieving this race to zero. So what if you had a time machine? What if you could actually go back in time to exactly the point in time before any disruption to your data occurred? And this is exactly one of our top features at Reduxio technology, the ability to, instead of go back to a previous snapshot a few hours ago, is actually pick any second that you want to go back to, press a button, and be able to move your data as if you had a time machine back to that particular second in time and do it immediately. So this technology, which we call backdating, allows the system administrator to pick a time. And again, you can pick a time, go back to it. If for some reason you decide that's not good enough, go back to a few seconds before. You actually have a time machine at your disposal, and you can traverse time. You can either create a copy, a clone of the data as it was in that particular time. And again, that action takes a split second, no matter how large the data was. And you can, for instance, create, let's say, 100 copies of your data at 10-second increments, look at them, decide which one is where your data is intact, and decide to work with that particular copy. Creating these clones does not use up any extra space. So you can create, as I said, 100 copies of your data spread out over different times and using no extra space at all. And as I explained, in 1 second granularity. This is something that is not available in any storage product on the market. Now, of course, it doesn't make sense to keep any second for a long span of time, for a year. So what we offer is a history policy that you can decide for different types of data to save different amounts of time. So for instance, for particularly the critical data, you may decide that you want to save, let's say, 14 days of every second, and then keep an extra 14 days of every hour, and then maybe 3 weeks of nightly backups. And then for other data types, you maybe want to keep just 1 day of seconds, and maybe for other types of data, you don't want to keep any history at all. Again, you decide, you run this time machine, and you can change this on the fly. You have a particular critical time now. You're producing end of year invoices. So let's say keep 3 weeks of every second. And once that period is over, go back to 1 week of every second. Now, use cases, the major use case, and the one we're discussing today is, of course, ransom or cyber attacks. But this is also very useful in cases of human error, in case of application errors, and sometimes also for proactive. Let's say you want to you're running a test and dev environment where you have 20 developers, each one wanting their own copy of the database. You can use this technology to achieve that. And this is how simple it is. You simply choose a volume, you actually enter the date, hour, second, you press a button to clone, and that's it, you're done. It literally takes a couple of seconds, and you have your copy of data back to that time. We also created a plugin for vSphere, which allows you to do this for a particular virtual machine. So you pick a particular virtual machine, you pick a time down to the second you press a button, and that particular VM will go back to that time within a couple of seconds. And as mentioned, one of the interesting case studies of this technology being put to action is the Barnstable. It's a very short YouTube movie, a minute and a half, that Craig Horowitz explains how we use this technology to save his organization from a real ransom attack. What we further went ahead and did is try and expand this capability to remote sites. So this is done on-prem, where we actually protect your data so you can go back in time. What we've done is created the ability to move data off-site and also have the capability, once we need to restore the data, do it in a very different way from other technologies. So what the world has noticed that there are many copies of data. Every organization keeps, every database has usually between 8 and 10 copies saved on site. And to manage these copies, we have a new vendor, a new kind of product family that came about, which is called copy data management, which means that besides your primary storage, you need to have secondary storage run, and that allows you to manage and keep your copies. What we've done is try and put this primary and secondary storage on the same system being managed by the same software. So besides the backdating, which I've just explained to you, we have a couple of other technologies. One is called NoRestore, which allows us to take data from one of our storage devices and move it elsewhere, either to another Reduxio device or to an S3 cloud, either a private cloud or Amazon S3, for example. Once it's there, anytime there's a disaster or anytime you want to access the data from perhaps a different site, you connect, you pick the point in time that you want to go back to, and within a couple of minutes, all of the data is available in that site. Even though it could be terabytes and terabytes, the data is available for your applications. And the way we do it, we actually move just the metadata, which means all the data is available. Any blocks that your application actually requires now will be brought immediately, while the other blocks will be moved in the background. We have a similar technology called NoMigrate, which allows us to actually migrate either on a one-off when you're migrating data into a Reduxio device, or when you're moving data from one site to another site for, let's say, a development team that's there, that also you hook it up, you pick which volume and which point in time you want, and the whole data is available immediately, even though it could be terabytes of data. So this is what our technology allows us to do. These are some of the features. Our first product that we came out to the marketplace a couple of years ago and is installed already in hundreds of locations in the US and elsewhere in the world is a storage device called the HX550. Besides the data protection capabilities, which I touched on, it has very efficient usage of space because we use data compression and data deduplication. And you can say that most storage devices on the planet do this. And that is true. I would say all of them have deduplication and compression, but they usually advise you not to use it. And there are many caveats to using it. Whereas with us, it's always turned on, always saving you. And we see an average of 4x savings with our device. Besides that, we have a unique continuous steering mechanism, which allows us to provide a very fast and very high performance experience, even though a lot of the data actually sits on rotational drive. Again, the tiering is very different from other tiering mechanisms, which are scheduled either once at night or every few hours. With us, tiering is done on a continuous basis every second. And we have a system which allows us in customer support to track all of our systems out in the field and be alerted of any event and I'm not just talking about a drive failure or a power failure, but even latencies of data access changing or temperature, or any event of that will trigger a customer support event, and our people will be on top of that. So that was in a nutshell how we allow you to protect your data, very different from any other product on the market, and allows you to actually go back to a second before any event happens and be up and running within minutes. Whereas with any other technology, you're liable to lose hours of your work and also have quite an amount of time before you could be up and running. So that was my part of the presentation today, and I'll return it back to Mike.
Eli, thank you very much. All right, so I want to do a few things as we begin to wind down. We've left 10 minutes for Q&A, and while we wait for questions, I wanted to, one, remind the audience that we have an opportunity here to hear from two experts, so please take advantage of this. While we wait for questions, I'm just going to ask John if there's anything you want to add to what Eli mentioned, right? Eli went through a pretty in-depth dive of our architecture. Anything else you want to comment on based on what Eli presented to our audience today?
No, I think that, at a high level, right, it kind of touches on something I said, right, there's two components of the math problem of ransomware, right? Prevention and then lowering the cost of recovery, right? And you need storage anyway, so it's not like, you're not getting out of that investment, because if you've got stuff, you've got to put it somewhere. So, I think it really tilts the math, in favor of the organizations to where, there'll always be threats, but maybe they go to crypto mining or crypto jacking and some other stuff that's, less likely to get you directly into the news.
Okay. All right. So just to sum up what we've talked about, obviously, John, we spent a lot of time talking about educating the workforce to recognize potential threats, a variety of, free online courses and other ways to educate our internal employee workforce. We spoke about developing a malware response protocol to be able to document and create, malware prevention guidelines. Anything that any documents or any standard references that you can point our listeners to on this specific tip?
Yeah, you certainly mentioned earlier, right, us having security policies generally, and there are many guides out there that you can get for free or low cost that you'd want to tailor to your organization. But, as far as dealing with malware, right, the important step of any incident response is, making sure people know what their responsibilities are and what steps they need to take and who they need to get involved, right? When do they call the city attorney? Do they call the FBI or not? Who's got the off-site backup or whatever you're going through, is to make sure that things are on fire. It's stressful. The less thinking and decision making that has to be done because everybody knows what their jobs are is crucial, right? It could take hours off of response very quickly.
All right, and then the very final is really a summary. So I guess what I want to do then, with no questions coming at us, is I want to remind the audience that this presentation, this entire webinar recording, will be available on an archive basis. So if some of your colleagues or associates, did not have a chance to join today because they had a meeting scheduled during this time frame, it will be made available. Again, as part of this, we've got 3 or 4 links for the audience. And I will work with John to capture all of those great tips that he provided about resources that are available, largely very inexpensively or free of charge. We will put that up on our Beyond the Blocks blog, which is part of the Reduxio.com website. And I want to thank both John Bambanek and Eli Lopez for joining us today, to sharing their insights and experiences with our audience. We look forward to seeing you again on a future webinar on the Bright Talk channel. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.